behaviorist approach. The behaviorist approach is only concerned with studying behavior that can be observed and measured. It is not concerned with mental processes of the mind. Introspection was rejected by behaviorists as its concept were vague and difficult to measure. Behaviorists tried to maintain more control and objectivity within their research and relied on lab studies to achieve this. Behaviorists suggest that the processes that govern learning are the same in all species, so animals, for example rats, cats and dogs and pigeons, can replace humans as experimental objects. In classical conditioning, during Pavlov's research, so this is about learning through association. Pavlov's research was about conditioning dogs to salivate when a bell rings. Unconditioned stimulus resulted in unconditioned response. Unconditioned stimulus equals food. Unconditioned response equals salivation. Neutral stimulus equals no response. Neutral stimulus equals bell. During conditioning, the neutral stimulus was added with the unconditioned stimulus, which is the bell, and food occurring at the same time. After conditioning, the conditioned stimulus resulted in a conditioned response. The conditioned stimulus became the bell, and the conditioned response salivation. Pavlov showed how a neutral stimulus, a bell, can come to elicit a new learning response, which is a conditioned response, through association. Operant conditioning, Skinner's research. Learning is an active process whereby humans and animals operate on their environment. Behavior is shaped and maintained by its consequences. Skinner's research was with rats and pigeons, specially designed cages. When a rat activated a lever or a pigeon pecked a disc, it was rewarded with a food pellet. A desirable consequence led to behavior being repeated. If pressing a lever meant an animal avoided an electric shock, the behavior would also be repeated. 3 types of consequences of behavior. Positive reinforcement is receiving a reward when a behavior is performed. Negative reinforcement is when an animal or human produces behavior that avoids something unpleasant. Punishment is an unpleasant consequence of behavior. Positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement increase the likelihood that behavior will be repeated. Punishment decreases it. Evaluation. One strength of behaviorism is that it gave psychology scientific credibility. The approach focused on the careful measurement of observable behavior within controlled lab settings. Behaviorists emphasized the importance of specific processes such as objectivity and replication. This brought the language and methods of the natural sciences into psychology, giving the subject greater credibility and status. One strength is the laws developed by behaviorists have a real-life application. The principles of conditioning have been applied to a broad range of real-world behaviors and problems. Token economy systems reward appropriate behavior with tokens that are exchanged for privileges. This is operant conditioning. These systems are successfully used in prisons and psychiatric wards. Treatments like these are suitable for patients who lack insight into their condition and are not capable of talking about their problems. One limitation is the behaviorist approach portrays a mechanistic view. Animals and humans are seen as passive and machine-like responders with the environment, with little conscious insight into their behavior. Other approaches, such as social learning theory and the cognitive approach, have placed much more emphasis on the mental events that occur during learning, the processes that mediate between stimulus and response, just that humans play a much more active role in their own learning. Another limitation is behaviorism is a form of environmental determinism. The approach sees all behaviors determined by past experiences that have been conditioned and ignores any influence that free will may have on behavior. Skinner suggested that free will was an illusion. When something happens, we impose a sense of having made the decision, but our past conditioning determined the outcome. This is an extreme position and ignores the influence of our conscious decision-making processes on behavior, as suggested by the cognitive approach. A final limitation is that animal research has ethical and practical issues. Although experimental procedures such as the Skinner box allowed behaviors to maintain a high degree of control over their research subjects, critics have drawn attention to the ethical issues involved. The animals were exposed to stressful and aversive conditions, and this may have affected how they reacted to the experimental situation. This means the validity of the findings from these studies might be questioned because the observed behavior was not normal.